My patrol boat survived 3 deployments, 2 hurricanes and a rogue pelican that mistook the radar dome for a mate. But the one thing it couldn't handle? Brenda Klein, Hollow Shore's self-appointed HOA president, chief aesthetic enforcer, and walking-talking warning label for unchecked suburban power. I came here for peace, bought a slip in the marina, unpacked a life's worth of boxes, and thought maybe, just maybe, I could drink my coffee next to the water without a PowerPoint presentation on the dangers of slightly mismatched shades of gray. But instead of peace, I got weekly violations signed with dramatic cursive, neighbors whispering like we lived under martial law, and a suburban monarchy held together by pink spandex and passive aggression. Ever had to fight HOA madness? Drop where you're watching from in the comments and smash that like button, because what started as a turf war over aesthetics quickly turned into something I couldn't make up if I tried. The first time I saw my vandalized boat, the world seemed to stop. My name is Nate Callahan, and I'm a 36-year-old Navy intelligence officer who thought I'd left chaos behind when I moved to Hollow Shore. I first met Brenda when I caught her measuring the distance between my hull and the dock with a pink glittery ruler. "It's nothing personal," she chirped, scribbling in a Hello Kitty notebook, "but marine equipment affects neighborhood harmony." She was dressed like a yoga Barbie in tactical capris, and her clipboard had more tabs than a Pentagon war file. I thought it was a joke. Then came the first violation notice, neatly taped to my door with what I later learned was artisanal HOA washi tape. "This color is disruptive to the coastal visual cohesion," it read. She meant my boat, navy gray, military standard. Apparently anything not pastel was visual terrorism. I stared at that note the way I used to look at encrypted enemy intel, equal parts confusion and concern, except this enemy wore glitter sneakers and sipped green smoothies like she was hydrating for a hostile takeover. But nothing prepared me for the morning I found my patrol boat bleeding neon green. The same boat that had carried me through fire zones and flooded cities now looked like it had been slimed by a radioactive toddler. Paint dripped down her flanks like war paint, only this wasn't some battlefield. This was war by paperwork, and standing there, holding my travel mug like a shield, I felt something I hadn't felt since the day they folded my father's flag and handed it to me at Arlington. A quiet, slow, burning devastation that had nothing to do with property values and everything to do with legacy. You don't pour 12 years of discipline, duty, and maintenance into a symbol of service just to watch it get tagged like a middle school locker. This wasn't just graffiti, it was a message. 1 part territorial piss, 2 parts middle-aged meltdown. Brenda Klein wasn't defending neighborhood charm, she was drawing battle lines with a spray can. I'd been stateside for 2 months, and somehow I'd wandered into a suburban skirmish that made active duty look like recess. She didn't just mark my boat, she marked me, like a wild animal tagging its territory with citrus-scented vengeance. The audacity would have been funny if it hadn't punched me in the chest like a sucker punch wrapped in HOA letterhead. I stood on that dock like I used to stand in briefing rooms, scanning, calculating, breathing through my teeth, and deciding how much of my dignity I was willing to sacrifice to keep the peace. They say every man has a breaking point. Mine just happened to be covered in ecotoxic slime and HOA stationery. My name is Nate Callahan, and I used to navigate war zones with tactical calm. But that morning, staring at the green streaks down my hull and the HOA notice stapled to my door, I knew exactly what I was up against. Not a rule book, a regime. And if Brenda wanted a battle over aesthetics, she was about to find out what military precision and righteous indignation looked like when you mess with the wrong veteran. This wasn't a community dispute anymore. This was personal. And like any good sailor, I was about to chart a course, straight through the middle of her plastic flamingo kingdom. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for 6:00 p.m. sharp, but Brenda Klein showed up at 5:15, heels clacking, blazer pressed, and attitude locked and loaded like she was testifying before Congress. The community room at Hollow Shore's clubhouse hadn't seen that much polyester since the HOA's square dance fiasco in 2017. Brenda came armed with a portable projector, a stack of color-coded folders, and a slideshow presentation titled Preserving the Value, One Boat at a Time. If PowerPoint had a smell, hers would have been desperation mixed with citrus toner. She even set out branded pens, like this was a TED Talk instead of a neighborhood ambush. And the kicker? She brought cookies, those dry, store-bought sugar ones with frosting that tastes like regret. Still, they were a prop, the illusion of hospitality wrapped around the scent of war. She clicked through photos like a prosecutor at trial, close-ups of my patrol boat taken at absurd angles, charts showing fictional declines in property values, even a grainy zoom-in of my hose reel like it was a national security threat. "This vessel," she announced with the gravitas of a funeral director reading a eulogy for curb appeal, "poses a direct threat to the aesthetic integrity of our community. You'd think I'd built an oil rig in the shallow end of the pool." Her tone was syrupy with concern, but every word dripped control. She threw around phrases like visual inconsistency, community cohesion, and nautical blight. And by the time she pulled out a map with arrows pointing at my boat like it was patient zero in a suburban outbreak, I could practically hear the soundtrack to Jaws in the background. The show was absurd, but the audience? They leaned in. That was the real danger. When she finally clicked to her final slide, a red graph plunging like a financial cliff, I stood up. No dramatic entrance, no microphone, just a calm voice and a thick folder. "My name is Nate Callahan. I'm a retired Navy officer. This boat served during operations most of you watched on cable news with your coffee. I laid out every piece of documentation like a magician showing the deck. Registration permits, a letter from the harbor master, zoning maps that clearly placed the marina outside HOA jurisdiction. I didn't need to raise my voice, I let the facts do the talking. And as I spoke, I watched the room shift, not in volume, but in weight. The atmosphere changed. Brenda's slideshow might have been flashy, but it was built on smoke. Mine was built like my boat, solid, seaworthy, and capable of taking fire. I ended with this. HOA rules don't extend to the marina, and even if they did, respect should never require permission slips. The silence afterward wasn't empty. It was heavy. That's when Sasha Melendez stood up, graceful and fierce in a way only military widows can be. "I remember when Brenda tried to fine me for planting lavender by my gate," she said. "Told me it was emotionally disruptive to the neighborhood palate." A few chuckles scattered, but more importantly, nods followed. Sasha's voice didn't quiver, it commanded. She wasn't just backing me, she was blowing the lid off Brenda's pattern of intimidation. "She's not protecting us, she's controlling us," Sasha finished, and just like that, the room tipped. Sasha wasn't just speaking truth, she was cutting through propaganda with surgical precision. You could see it on faces, eyebrows raised, shoulders straightened, the first signs of people remembering their spines. And I stood there, listening, realizing that Sasha's story wasn't a sidebar, it was a turning point. You could see it in the way people shifted. Eyes darted to each other, not to Brenda. Heads tilted with that slow, dawning recognition. Maybe this wasn't about community at all. Maybe it was about control. Brenda's next move was supposed to be a rebuttal, but her voice cracked like a vinyl record hitting a scratch. Her grip on the clicker had turned white-knuckled. Even Tom Milton, the HOA's attorney and longtime bylaw enthusiast, looked like he wanted to melt into his ergonomic chair. No vote was taken that night, no ruling issued, but something happened far more important than policy. The illusion cracked. The myth of Brenda as protector of neighborhood order fell apart under the fluorescent lights of a community center with bad coffee and great acoustics. And once an illusion shatters, it can't be taped back together with even the most artisanal washi. As I left the clubhouse, the same neighbors who once avoided eye contact now nodded in quiet solidarity. One even muttered, "About time," under his breath. Brenda didn't say a word. She just packed up her projector like someone wrapping a failed science fair project. But her eyes, they made a promise. This wasn't over. And honestly, that was fine by me, because what she didn't realize was I'd spent years handling dictators in camouflage. Handling one in a blazer, that was just Thursday. And while Brenda thought this was her battleground, she'd just discovered that some of us are trained to fight smarter, not louder. This wasn't a setback, it was the first dent in her crown, and for the first time, I knew. The tide was starting to turn. If Brenda Klein couldn't win in the town square, she'd drag the war into the shadows. The week after that HOA meeting felt like living inside a malfunctioning bureaucracy simulator. It started with a knock zoning compliance. Then came fire safety. Then pest control. Twice. A revolving cast of apologetic city officials showed up at my door, holding clipboards and looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. "We got a complaint about an unpermitted structure," one said, gesturing vaguely toward my neatly stacked garden tools. Another mentioned excessive noise, even though my quietest moments were apparently loud enough to rattle community tranquility. Each inspection found nothing. But that wasn't the point. Brenda wasn't trying to catch me in violation. She was trying to catch me off guard. And I'll admit it started to work. The rhythm of harassment wasn't explosive. It was relentless, like a leaky faucet in a locked room. It doesn't flood the place, but it rots everything over time. I found myself jumping every time a city vehicle passed the curb, reading notices like they were coded messages from some Kafkaesque game master. But the worst part? It wasn't what Brenda did with city inspectors. It was what she did with her words, whispered ones mostly. "Did you know he's ex-military? Seems a little tense, doesn't he?" I heard he talks to himself down by the boat. It was a smear campaign in soft focus, the kind that doesn't accuse, it suggests. She didn't need to call me unstable, she just needed to float the possibility, like a rumor in disguise. And once that seed was planted, it grew fast in the well-manicured soil of suburban suspicion. You'd think I would have fought back, reported her, filed my own complaints, but every time I sat down to draft something, I stopped. Maybe it was the training, maybe it was pride, or maybe I just didn't want to become the thing I was fighting. I'd faced real enemies, ones with weapons, not clipboards. So I told myself to hold the line. I kept documenting, I kept calm. But at night, sleep became an idea, not a reality. I'd lie awake, listening for new knocks, wondering who in the neighborhood was watching me through blinds. Paranoia, even when justified, doesn't wear well on a man who once wore a uniform. And every day I resisted retaliation. I felt like I was dragging an anchor behind me. Quiet, but heavy. The breaking point didn't come with a bang. It came with a phone call. My old Navy CO, Captain Douglas, reached out on a Thursday morning with the tone of a man balancing duty with disbelief. "I got a message from someone claiming to be the president of your homeowners association," he said, slow and careful. "She's concerned about your mental well-being, said she thought command might want to check in." For a second, I didn't even respond. Not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. Brenda had finally done it. She'd taken the war beyond Hollow Shore. She had tried to weaponize the one thing that mattered most, my service. It wasn't just a smear anymore. It was sabotage. And suddenly, moral restraint didn't feel noble. It felt like standing still while someone set fire to everything I'd built. Captain Douglas didn't scold me. He understood. "I've dealt with civilian nonsense before," he said. "But this is something else." He told me to document everything, keep records, and let him know if it escalated. His voice carried that Navy steel, the kind you don't hear unless you've earned it. "We don't let our people get run over by clipboard tyrants," he said. And with that, something shifted inside me. The tether that kept me silent loosened, because when someone tries to paint you as broken to win a petty war, you realize restraint is honorable. But there comes a time when turning the other cheek means giving someone both hands to push you off a cliff. And maybe it was time I reminded Brenda that some men know exactly how to push back, precisely, legally, and permanently. That night, I sat at my kitchen table. Not to write a complaint, but to sketch a strategy. If she wanted to play long games, I could play deeper. Not by matching her cruelty, but by building the kind of case that doesn't shout. It lands, like a gavel, or a wave, silent, massive, inevitable. And while Brenda kept spraying fear like perfume, I started preparing something she'd never expect. Accountability. Because sooner or later, every war leaves footprints, and I was about to follow hers, straight to the edge of her hot pink kingdom. It was 2:17 a.m. and I heard the click of flip-flops on the dock, slow, sneaky, and about as subtle as a marching band in a library. I'd been sleeping light for weeks, which is to say I'd been sleeping like a man expecting war and waking up to a squirrel. But that night my gut said, get up. I moved to the window, camera in hand, and there she was. Brenda Klein, wrapped in black like a flamingo-themed ninja, crouching near my boat with a bag full of something that rattled. You haven't lived until you've watched your HOA president try to commit a felony dressed like she's going to a midnight Zumba class. I hit record. Sometimes justice needs a witness. And sometimes it needs 1080p night vision with sound. She shook a can of spray paint like it was a rattle from her HOA baby shower. The sound echoed across the still marina water like a signal flare for stupidity. Then she started painting. Big, sloppy letters that looked like a toddler's revenge note. It wasn't even legible. Something about out and blight and possibly the word scourge if you tilted your head. But here's what really mattered. The paint. Neon green, thick, industrial, and dripping. Not just on my boat, but into the water, into the protected conservation zone Hollow Shore loves to brag about in brochures. I didn't stop her. I let her finish her masterpiece, like a documentarian filming the last scene before the credits roll. She tossed the empty can into the bushes like a mic drop and strutted off with the swagger of someone who thought crime was just another HOA perk. The next morning, I got to work like it was an op. Gloves, samples, photos, measurements. Every angle of the damage, every drop of paint that had oozed from my hull into the current. The stuff looked like Gatorade with an attitude. Thick, radioactive, and absolutely not in compliance with anything resembling environmental law. I bagged a chunk of algae that had turned the same shade of lime rage. Just in time, Sasha showed up. "You're not going to believe this," she said, holding her phone. Her outdoor cam had caught everything, from Brenda's not-so-stealthy approach to her very real chemical warfare. "She even tripped over a sprinkler head," Sasha added with a smirk. "I watched the footage. It was glorious. It was evidence. It was federal." The cans weren't just labeled, they were practically confessing. Industrial marine enamel with enough warning symbols to make a hazmat team sweat. Toluene, methyl ethyl ketone, stuff banned from being discharged into protected waters under federal law. Brenda hadn't just vandalized property, she'd committed an environmental crime. And better yet, she'd done it with the kind of flair that made prosecution look like a group project. By noon, I had a folder so thick it needed its own zip code. Sasha helped organize. Every sample, every photo, every video, cataloged, time-stamped, logged. It felt like prepping for a mission. Only this time, the battlefield was legal, and the target had neon nails and an ego bigger than her jurisdiction. But just like in real operations, timing was everything. We had what we needed. Now we needed to deploy. I called the EPA like I was ordering takeout. Calm, precise, and hungry for satisfaction. They transferred me to Agent Jennifer Park in Environmental Crimes Enforcement. When I explained the materials, the protected zone, and the footage, she got very quiet. "Send me everything," she said, "immediately." Her tone had that crisp efficiency of someone who'd seen too many disasters and was about to pin one more to a corkboard. I uploaded the files, then followed her instructions to document a formal report. "Do not approach her again," she warned. Let us handle the enforcement." And just like that, the war changed. Brenda didn't know it yet, but her late-night hissy fit had gone federal. The paint she thought was her victory banner, it was now her signature on an indictment. And the dock she painted it on? Well, that was about to become Exhibit A. The knock came at exactly 8:30 a.m., crisp and official. Not the kind of knock you get from a neighbor with banana bread, but the kind that means something's about to end. Permanently. Brenda Klein opened her front door wearing what can only be described as battlefield couture, neon pink spandex, oversized sunglasses, and the confidence of someone who thought she was answering for a package, not a federal crime. Instead, she found Agent Jennifer Park and 2 officers from the County Environmental Crimes Unit, badges, warrant, and handcuffs ready. According to Sasha, who watched the whole thing from behind her curtain with a thermos of coffee and the poise of a neighborhood news anchor, Brenda didn't even process what was happening until the cuffs clicked. It was only then that her sunglasses came down and the meltdown began, loud, public, and pinker than ever. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. My job had been done the moment I pressed send on that EPA file. But the neighborhood? Oh, it showed up. Half of Hollow Shore emerged from their blinds like turtles from shells, watching their self-appointed queen be escorted down her pristine front steps like a fallen celebrity on laundry day. One kid asked, "Is that lady going to jail, Mom?" And the response, "Yes, sweetie, for being a flamingo in a china shop," wasn't wrong. The moment went viral on the HOA's private group chat within minutes. Justice had not only arrived, it had arrived in khaki, on schedule, and with federal backing. But the real surprise came when Greg Milton, the HOA's longtime lawyer and professional furniture impersonator, finally blinked. After months of squinting at bylaws and pretending to be Switzerland, he showed up at my mailbox with a folder and a conscience. "Travis, sorry, Nate, I need to make something very clear," he said, eyes darting like pigeons in a windstorm. I had nothing to do with this. I advised her not to escalate. She didn't listen. Inside the folder were memos, emails, and meeting notes, each one a breadcrumb in Brenda's trail of bad decisions. One even read, "Greg, I don't care if it's illegal. This boat is a blight." He gave it to me like a man tossing a life jacket to someone already back on land. But hey, I took it. Every paper in that folder was another nail in the coffin of her credibility. And just like that, the community began to breathe. You could feel it. People who once looked down when I passed now gave me nods, hellos, even the occasional "we're with you." It wasn't loud, it was gradual, but it was real. Sasha organized a marina cleanup day just because, and nearly a dozen folks showed up. The HOA meeting started sounding like discussions again instead of royal decrees. For the first time in months, Hollow Shore felt less like a regime and more like a place you might actually want to live in. Turns out, when the fog of fear lifts, people remember how to talk and, more importantly, how to listen. Brenda's reign hadn't just ended. It had collapsed under the weight of its own self-importance. The final twist came a week later in the form of a plain white envelope, slid under my door like a note from a former life. It was from Ashley Klein, Brenda's daughter. The handwriting was tight, careful, the words even more so. "I want to apologize for my mother's actions," she wrote. "I've watched this unfold from a distance and am ashamed of what it's done to you and to this community." Ashley explained that she'd studied environmental policy, that she knew exactly what those chemicals had done, and that her mother's behavior didn't reflect how she was raised. At the bottom, she included a line that stuck with me. "Some legacies are better ended than inherited." Her letter wasn't just an apology. It was an exhale from a family that had been holding its breath under Brenda's rule for far too long. 2 days after that, a big red "for sale" sign went up on Brenda's perfect lawn like a white flag dipped in desperation. The shutters were closed, the flamingos were gone, and the house that once loomed over the neighborhood like a threat now sat quietly, waiting for someone new to make it a home, not a fortress. I stood across the street and watched the wind tug at the corners of the sign, thinking about how fast power evaporates when it's built on fear. Brenda had ruled Hollow Shore like a queen, But in the end, she fell like a Vegas act exposed by daylight. No curtain call, no applause. Just headlines, court dates, and a story that every neighbor would retell with a little more courage each time. 3 months after Brenda's arrest, I was elected HOA president in a vote that felt more like a neighborhood sigh of relief than a campaign. No yard signs, no debates, just a quiet shift, like the tide pulling back after a storm. I ran on a platform of transparency, fairness, and a wild new idea: not treating your neighbors like suspects. And turns out, that kind of thing plays well with people tired of being managed like children. My first act as president wasn't dramatic. I didn't order flamingos into exile or rename Brenda's old house the Pink Menace. I just passed a simple motion: no more enforcement without a fair, open appeals process. That one rule did what 100 meetings couldn't. It made people breathe again. Meanwhile, the marina, once the epicenter of HOA madness, was healing. Federal crews came through with environmental support funding, installing filtration systems, restoring eelgrass beds, and monitoring marine life recovery like proud babysitters with PhDs. The water slowly lost its sickly tint and returned to its natural glassy calm. Fish came back, birds came back, and eventually so did the laughter of kids skipping rocks off the dock without anyone citing them for unauthorized shoreline disruption. The place stopped feeling like the scene of a crime and started looking like a postcard again. Nature forgave faster than most people, but it made sure to leave behind a scar as a reminder. And in some poetic way, that scar felt earned. Brenda? She didn't vanish into thin air, though I imagine she'd have preferred it. Her court date came and went with about as much dignity as a piñata at a law school graduation. The judge read through the charges like a bedtime story from the Book of Consequences: federal environmental violations, intentional contamination of protected waters, community harassment. Her sentence: a $300,000 0-cents EPA fine, 800 hours of marine restoration labor, 2 years of probation, and letters of apology to every family in Hollow Shore. I didn't attend her sentencing. I had a harbor committee meeting, but Maria did, and she told me Brenda wore beige. No pink, no flair, just silence, and a face that finally understood what it meant to live under someone else's rule. That was her real punishment, not the fines, not the labor, but the loss of control. I got one of those letters she wrote, tucked in a manila envelope, typed, double-spaced, formal. But even through the careful wording, you could feel it, regret like wet paper. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't try to explain. She just acknowledged. And weirdly, that meant something. Not because I needed her to be sorry, but because I needed her to know she lost. That justice, when it shows up wearing a government badge and steel to boots, doesn't knock, it kicks. And sometimes it takes a vandalized boat, a good neighbor with a camera, and a can of neon green spray paint to remind a community that tyranny, even in yoga pants, has an expiration date. Last week I took the patrol boat out for a sunset cruise, fully restored, paint like new, engine humming with the kind of peace that doesn't come easy. The sun dipped low over the water, setting everything aglow in orange and gold. No toxic streaks, no sirens, no spreadsheets masquerading as morality, just me, the sound of water against the hull, and the quiet understanding that some battles aren't about winning, they're about not folding, about standing tall while small people try to shrink you. And in the end, when the clipboard queens fall and the marina sparkles again, you realize justice isn't loud, it doesn't strut, it just sails. As I sat at the helm of my old patrol boat, gliding through water that once mirrored chaos but now shimmered with calm, I didn't think about revenge. I thought about peace. The earned kind. Not the kind HOA bylaws pretend to offer, but the kind you fight for with restraint, with truth, and with neighbors who quietly show up when it counts. I didn't win because I yelled louder. I won because I stood my ground while someone else collapsed under the weight of their own ego. And if this story taught me anything, it's that the strongest man in the room isn't the one waving rules like swords. It's the one who knows how to wait, how to document, how to rise when the tide finally turns. And maybe that's the real message behind this wild ride through pink power trips and HOA warfare. That dignity isn't weakness. That defending what's right doesn't require screaming, just clarity and a little help from those who've also had enough. You saw how a decorated veteran used precision, not pettiness, how a widow used her voice, not vengeance, and how even a neighborhood divided by fear could find its way back to community when truth took the mic. This wasn't just a story about a boat. It was about ownership, of your home, of your values, and of the space you refused to surrender to tyranny in high-waisted leggings. It's about resilience wrapped in irony, justice delivered with quiet resolve, and yes, the poetic downfall of a flamingo queen who forgot that power borrowed through fear gets repossessed by truth. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you that standing firm can still change the tide, go ahead and tap that like button, leave a comment below sharing your own haha, horror, or victory, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. Because let's be honest, in the world of haha, didn't know, the real estate might be local, but the drama, oh, it's always nationwide. Stay strong, stay kind, and stay tuned.